It's 6 o'clock in London. It's 1 p.m. in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 3 a.m. in Sydney, 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO VID live stream, Series 15, Episode 5. That makes for Episode 89 starts here. Exciting news today from the London Metals Exchange in the wake of LME Chairman Gay Huey Evans standing down last week. The Oliver Wyman report on the nickel nightmare has been published. More about that in tomorrow's Exchange Invest newsletter. Are you a subscriber? Meanwhile, over in Germany, BaFin, rather seismic stuff for all those of you who, like me, may have spent the Christmas holidays watching financial videos and documentaries. I have to say, Madoff is absolutely gripping stuff if you get a chance to see it on Netflix. But anyway, that FT documentary about Wirecard puts BaFin in mind. BaFin seem to be flexing their muscle after the embarrassment of the Wirecard debacle. They've been telling Eurex and Clearstream to clean up organizational deficiencies. Meanwhile, in the court news since we saw you last, Sam Bankman-Fried has, of course, been extradited from the Bahamas to the USA on his own recognizance and released on bail of $250 million. My hikes, the inflation in this world has been seismic during 2022. Just a year ago, $250 million was enough money to supposedly settle his entire New World Central Counterparty Clearing System. By the end of the year, it was just enough to get one bloke with curious hair bail in the state of California from the Southern District of New York. Anyway, SBF says he's not guilty, which I suppose is in line with his mother's exciting treatises of guilt and or the lack of it. So that probably is no surprise that he's decided that he's going to say he's pleading not guilty to anything the US state has sought to accuse him of, as was the case in his hearing on January the 3rd. Let's get on with the show today, and we have a gripping show. Our guest today is Simon O'Brien. Our topic is ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Market, building an island of excellence. Why do we refer to the island of excellence? Well, of course, that dates back to a headline from an opinion piece that I wrote, which was published a year or two back in the National in Abu Dhabi, where I was talking about the arrival of IFAD, the ICE Futures Abu Dhabi, which took only 504 days to be built. And at that point in time, I talked about the island of excellence emerging around Mirban Futures in this case, but it's much more beside. Simon O'Brien leads the markets department, which is responsible for the authorization and supervision of market infrastructures at the FSRA, I should say, of ADGM. Simon has led key projects, including the development of ADGM's virtual asset regulatory framework, its spot commodities environmental instruments framework, and its remote member framework for ADGM exchanges and clearinghouses. Simon's a member of the FSRA's Management, Authorization and Policy Committees and is a member of IOSCO Committee 2 on Secondary Market. Joining the FSRA of ADGM, Simon has worked at ASX on two separate occasions, I hasten to add. He was the head of listings at Nasdaq Dubai in the next emirate across, head of supervision at the Sydney Stock Exchange, as well as leading the primary markets team at the DFSA, which is, of course, the Dubai Financial Supervision Authority. Simon, greetings and welcome to IPO VID. It's lovely to see you today on screen. Let me ask you, where in the world are you today, Simon?
Patrick, it's great to be here. Greetings, everybody. I'm in Abu Dhabi, just past 10 o'clock at night. Not as lovely weather as you, Patrick, but it's lovely here all the same. The building behind me gives a bit of a view of the island on ADGM, and I'm sure we'll explore a bit of that today.
We're going to get to the island in just a moment. That's really, really interesting to talk about it in its whole, not just the topography, but everything that's going on there in a regulatory and market standpoint, a unique financial center that's pulsating with growth in the Gulf, in the UAE. But let me ask you, I mean, how did you actually get into finance? I mean, first of all, I think a lot of our viewers will get a hint of an accent there, and I don't think it's from the UAE.
No, it's not from the UAE, and different to my surname, it's not from Ireland either, Patrick, to disappoint you. It is from Australia. Most of my career has been in the exchange world, sort of doubled on both sides of the fence, as you could say, in the regulatory side and also the operational side of the exchanges. To get into finance, it really started in Edinburgh many years ago on the bond side of things, buying and selling bonds, and have gone from there into financial infrastructures and markets and things like that as well. And it's led me all the way here to Abu Dhabi, where we are trying to apply what many of us have learned from around the world and build it here in ADGM and also within the Middle East and North African region. So my accent is a bit different.
Certainly a different accent. One of the many O'Briens and folk of Irish origin who found their way to Australia over the course of the couple hundred years of the Commonwealth there. And quite incredible. Let me just say, actually, hello and break off. Say, hello, Marcus Ward. A happy new year to everybody, says Marcus. A very, very happy new year to you too, Marcus. It's lovely to see you tuning into our first show of the year. So, okay. Therefore, I'm going to presume that you got your first break in finance in Sydney and Australia. Is that right?
Well, Sydney, indeed. And from there, stayed there for a few years, Sydney, Melbourne, Edinburgh, Brisbane, Sydney, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. And Abu Dhabi now for seven years.
Abu Dhabi for 7 years. That's quite incredible. So, I mean, that's quite an achievement because, I mean, talk us through this incredible island in Abu Dhabi. You've been there really since pretty much day one, or in fact, possibly day -1, as it were, before it was even open.
Yeah, it was day -1, and we started building this really back in 2013. And to be honest, a lot of it was being built, and many people might be aware of the DIFC and the structure that's occurred at the cabinet and federal level here to allow for financial free zones. So what they've done is allow each of the Emirates, if they decided to do so, there's 7 Emirates within the UAE, to design a financial free zone. The best way to explain that for those from Europe and the UK is imagine Canary Wharf is carved off as its own jurisdiction with its own laws and requirements, its own court, its own common law courts where we can have judges opine on various cases and others 24 hours a day, a full digital court in that sense as well. 7 years in the making, and we've learned an awful lot through that time and still many more things to learn. But it was the ability to come here and work on something new, as you've touched on in terms of some of the policy legislative amendments as well. But that sense, it's really, really good. We have something like 20 members within ADGM from 20 different jurisdictions. So we think quite globally in that sense and learn a lot. Just to add, I know we touched on I'm from Australia, but we don't spend time saying this is how we do it in Australia or this is how we do it in the UK or the US or others. We do try to work through what is best and what is most applicable and what is most relevant to designing those markets. And that's the exciting thing. I suppose that's why I'm still here after 7 years, is we've still got so much more to build.
Well, certainly it's very interesting. I mean, you came along with AD a few years after the Dubai folks built DIFC. And I noticed recently, I think DIFC was announcing the fact that it had reached something like 5% of the GDP of Dubai, which is a pretty stunning number, actually, to go from a standing start in barely a generation. You mentioned a couple of things I want to unpack there. I mean, first one was you talk about your separate legal and court system. I think that's something that's very interesting to look at. And in fact, for those who've been watching regularly on IPO VID, you may remember that we had Barney Reynolds on talking about this very system a year or so ago from Shearman and Sterling. So explain to us, your jurisdiction completely is unique to the ADGM.
Correct, yes. And Sherman's and Sterling did play a key part in the design of the framework. There's no doubt Barney and team have been close to ADGM, I suspect and imagine close to another jurisdictions within the region as well. We're a little bit different, first of all, as we're an island. So when you cross the bridge physically over the island off the main island of Abu Dhabi and come onto the island of Al Maria Island, somewhere over that bridge you cross into our jurisdiction. And by jurisdiction, it's the application or disapplication of various commercial laws and requirements. So the onshore laws and requirements around how you construct a business, what type of rules and regulations they're going to comply with, the legal framework around that is all disapplied. And then what we did was apply on an evergreen basis the legislative framework, particularly of the UK. So we're one of a couple of jurisdictions, the DIFC is another, where common law is applied. The legal and legal legislative framework of the UK is applied, and that's particularly relevant to our judges who can then follow precedent as established in the UK and other common law jurisdictions. The difference then as well, even further, which is we can self-legislate as a regulatory body on the requirements around what a broker would do, what the general conduct requirements are, fees, prudential requirements, etc. as well, all within the prism of that UK, similar to UK legislative environment as well. The DIFC, yes, is an island in a legislative sense, but is also, you wouldn't know when you cross from one street to another in Abu Dhabi. You definitely do know when you cross the island into our island. It is a distinctly different jurisdiction, whether it's a bakery, a broker, a bookshop, it all sits within that regime, which keeps it interesting, and also is highly flexible and also gives certainty around that. If you go then to, I know many people on the call might look at a derivatives regime and others as well. The ISDA requirements, the netting requirements were built in from day one as well. So we've learnt a lot of what the other jurisdictions have done and have built that in over not just on launch, but also since then and looking forward as well. That's keeping our policy and legal teams and obviously the environment and the firms within the island very engaged on what is next and what's best to apply. Of course, it can't just be legislating. We will then tire out our firms and have sort of regulatory overburden. We've got to do it prudently and properly at the same time as well, but we're still building it out.
That's quite fascinating. I mean, there's a lot there. I must say, one of the things that really does strike me is the physicality of the Almunia Island, because, as you say, well, it's reminiscent of the City of London, isn't it? I mean, the Corporation of London, the body that controls the City of London square mile, still owns the bridges that connect South London to the city. And the idea there having been that, well, from 1,000 odd years ago, there was this danger that London might be invaded. So therefore, the Corporation of London had within its purview the opportunity to actually destroy the bridges. Now, I appreciate nobody's talking about any form of pugilistic contest in the UAE, but it's a very, very interesting psychological point that as you go across that bridge in your Kareem or whatever, as you're driving, you get there and you are suddenly in this English language or essentially English common law environment, which makes such a difference. And I mean, it must have been fascinating because when you first got there, you mentioned Canary Wharf. I mean, there's been an incredible actual physical development to create that island in the course of the last 7 or 8 years in just the built space.
Absolutely, and it's a reflection of the development not just of ADGM but also Abu Dhabi, the UAE in general as well. And you touched on the fact of, you know, Dubai with the efforts of the DIFC is to reflect and develop and show what the financial services as a sector are bringing to the economy there and within the UAE as well. And ADGM is a reflection of that. And I think that the really interesting part is, having worked on the island, and for those that have visited, we have some of the best restaurants and bars and places to go and have a coffee within the UAE as well. So it's not just about a place to go and do work. There are people that will live on the island, that will shop on the island, will go and watch a movie, go to dinner on the island as well. You've got some of the great hospitals. You've got Cleveland Clinic, Abu Dhabi, and others on the island as well. Some very good hotels on the island. It really is, if you look at the vision of what they're building and what we're building there, not just for this decade, but for the decades going forward as well, it's a really important part of the island. I mean, we've got a number of bridges connecting there. One of the bridges from here, maybe one day will connect onto Saadiyat Island. People maybe